in Africa, Kibera, where issues of what individuals are going to eat the next day is a challenge. And I want to use that to paint a dilemma for regulators, for policymakers, for key decision makers. This topic of AI is at one level very sophisticated, and policymakers need to keep pace with what's happening on the global stage. On the other hand, it's very far removed from the daily lived reality. They have to think about bread, they have to think about food, etc. I'll frame my intervention as this constant fight between innovation and regulation. So from where I sit in Kenya, the policymaker has to think about the major companies, Google, Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, etc. And this played out recently in the WorldCoin debacle. We essentially had a large new company, Altman, and individuals' irises were being scanned in order to give them an identity so that they could operate in this economy. And the company has been around for a while. Sometime last year, MIT flagged there were ethical issues. The company had all kinds of approvals in Kenya. But it was not until there were large queues of individuals trying to get their irises scanned to receive the equivalent of about $50, 7,000 shillings, that it became an ethical issue, and Kenya was the first country to ask WorldCoin to stop their activities. It's very difficult for a policymaker to think of national security issues, bread and butter issues, while at the same time trying to create an environment where large companies in the field of AI can excel. And I'd like to pick on a point from the last panel discussion. There was a question on whether ethics and responsible AI, whether individuals should even care. I'll give an absolute emphatic here, particularly, I'll not even say in the global south, in Kenya, in Africa, in Kibera, in Madaraka, in Nairobi, ethics has to be at the core of anything emerging in AI. And my parting shot is, if we think of AI practitioners, on one level you have the developers, so issues of hardware and issues of algorithms. This is happening in Silicon Valley, this is happening in Beijing. And then you've got issues of data, so GDPR in Europe has helped guide that. In Kenya, the challenge is users. We are consumers of all things AI, and at times it's not very clear what is being consumed. And somebody needs to think for the sophistication at Strathmore that you and I, Soren, are enjoying, and the daily struggle that is playing out in Kibera, a few kilometers from where we are. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Martin. I think we only have a few minutes left of a very broad and ambitious agenda here. So I think there are probably two areas that would be important to touch on. One, how do we promote then sort of collaboration between legislators and industry in ensuring that we have the partnerships that are necessary? What are the fora we need to develop that? And the other would be, how do we ensure trust? We are also in an arms race where countries are raising and where we are all sort of looking for the best minds to secure that development. Matthias, on the partnership, that's something that you have worked a lot on in Europe, sort of building networks and partnerships around some of these challenging issues. What is your comment on that?
Yes, so indeed we're building the European Skills and Education data space. And it's basically a data network to allow people and organizations to share data for what? Basically for AI use cases. And so the trust in AI is very important, because at some point people say, okay, great, I can share my profile to this AI and it will tell me what kind of job, what kind of sector, what kind of training I should do. Who controls this AI? That's the big question. Who controls the criteria and who makes sure that the recommendations are fair and unbiased and everything that has been talked about today? And so I think the collaboration there between the regulator and the industry is essential. Regulator should, and as it's been done in Europe and in other places, of course, regulate and set laws and the criteria and so on, without going into too much specific, much more like an AI should be transparent, an AI product should enable different checks, transparency in the algorithm or unbiased algorithms have to be implemented in this and that sector and so on. But it should not stop at regulation. It should also, public sector should fund a basic infrastructure. And a basic infrastructure for trustworthy AI, it's basically a bunch of systems that allow any organization that is working, building algorithms to be able to assess, evaluate, compare their algorithms, make sure they respect certain criteria, like a set of building blocks that they can use. This basic infrastructure will not be built by the public sector. It will be subcontracted to the industry. So that's the first way to integrate the industry in the strategy, is funding them to say, here you have money to implement building blocks in an infrastructure that guarantees that AI built on top of it respect our rules. And then this industry, it will be the cloud providers, the AI builders and so on, will want this infrastructure to be used because it will mean a bit more business for them, and will start getting organizations on top of it. We have to think it like in the beginning where people were building apps and websites, you needed to set up your own server, set up the operating system on it, decide how much capacity it can hold and so on. Today, you go on Azure, on AWS, it's all already taken care of, and you just need to put in your code and design your app. In the end, what we want is an infrastructure to say to anybody who wants to build AIs, here, if you come, you can get access to data. We will evaluate your algorithm. We will make sure it's compliant with the regulations, and you can just focus on your product. And that will drive adoption of this infrastructure and of the values it holds. And so that's I think the industry is for the public sector to regulate and to fund an infrastructure, and for the industry and private sector to build that infrastructure, and then to have, in a sense, a lot of incentives to use it. That's more of the carrot, and the stick would be to impose in certain sectors that the AIs used have gone through this infrastructure, have gone through the tests before being able to access public markets, schools, citizens, and so on. And that's more or less what's happening in Europe. Across the world, we're talking about inequalities across the world. Every country, every region can set up the same strategy because it's basically software development. So it's not extremely costly. Moreover, most of this infrastructure building is open source, so can be taken from other places and readapted in each region of the world. So I think that's one way of collaborating, public and private, and also spreading the kind of same concepts around the world.
Thank you, Matthias. So I just very brief comments, but I saw both you, Juliana, and you, Joao, nodding on the partnerships there. Just a very brief comment from you, Juliana. Is it possible to develop such industry partnerships and leverage that to develop also the public sector?
Yes, I think so. I think the private sector plays a fundamental role in this regard, and it's necessary, especially here in Brazil, to overcome the false dichotomy between the public and private sector. The Brazilian strategy must be based on cooperation between the state and the private sector, that is between the public and private sectors. The best way to focus is and to mitigate the challenges is the establishment of these barriers, establish a way to work together. Companies have pioneer spirit and expertise, and the country does not need to create things from the scratch. So there is a huge space for interaction between public and private, and in my opinion, we must create incentives to companies and create also tools to bring technology to schools, for example, and we can have the private sector doing this together with us. So I still believe we have a big space and a huge opportunity now to work together.
Thank you very much. And that's the last very big question in 10 seconds, and that's impossible. But we've talked about sort of the government-industry relation. How do we then ensure trust on a global level, and how do we ensure a framework that provides a level playing field across the world? A very brief comment. I know that's impossible. Who dares to venture with a 20-second suggestion?
Maybe I can take a short, Soren. Business and human rights exists globally. There's an attempt to domesticate it in Kenya. We've adopted it for the AI space. Can we explore that through partnerships? The Sustainable Development Goals are prevalent. They don't speak very well to business and human rights and the UN Global Compact. How do we get all those together and explore them specifically? Digital economy, AI, we are trying that at Strathmore.
Thank you. Kilian, João, any sort of final comment?
What we see is that I think you need an interplay. Often on the one hand side, you need these international activities, and we see that now there are a lot. I mean, there are the UNESCO recommendation on AI. There is the new initiative to launch a UN office to supervise large language models. We see the Council of Europe is working on the first international convention on AI. The G7, the G20 working on it. So there is a lot of things going on. But at the same time, I believe firmly that it's driven as well by national attempts, because what they see, or regional attempts, like on the European Union level, they see that if the European Union, for instance, is regulating, this will set a benchmark, and this will, of course, then create some kind of requirements which those will have to fulfill who want to come to that market. And that as well gives an economic incentives to think about globally how we can harmonize these standards, because we don't want to have a variety of different standards for different markets. So as soon as you have a critical mass, so you have on a market with a critical size, you have requirements which give you a certain standard. This has an effect, either to follow up on these standards or to start to coordinate these standards globally. And therefore, because I think you need these both. You need to push and to pull a little bit if you want to reach this global level playing field. And then, of course, we have organizations like global standardization organizations which can help, or global organizations where we can organize this political dialogue. But there must as well be this attempt that otherwise you go regional and then others have to follow you, because otherwise it may take too long in order to really regulate in the effective way this new technology.
Thank you so much. João, this is your agenda. You get 20.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what was said by Martin and by Kilian. I think multilateralism is the answer to this. So if there are topics that require organizations that bring together different geographies, different contexts, different administrative cultures, this is one of the topics, and we've been seeing. So it was expressed already. Some of the organizations that are doing this. I would say it makes particularly sense that organizations within the UN family sphere, meaning beyond even beyond the ones that were mentioned by Kilian, the ITU, even the UN, the World Bank, etc., that can concentrate on this and that can be really proactive and efficient on, as we mentioned previously, making sure that you have all the right voices on board, voices that represent the diversity of the globe, voices that also go beyond the governments and that can represent the other sectors. I think that's absolutely key. Over to you, sorry.
Thank you so much, and perfect place to stop a really interesting conversation. Thank you much. Thank you so much, all of you, for your time and your insight and for sharing all that. And I do apologize for forcing you to discuss such big topics in such short little time. Thank you very, very much, all of you. Over to you, Elise, I think.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye. Thank you.